Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. And if you remember, we're doing Mummy Month in the Den for October of 19. Boy, am I old. October of 2024. And so today we're going to be talking about the sequel to the movie we looked at last week, The Mummy's Hand. We're looking at The Mummy's Tomb, and it is a true sequel with many actors reprising their roles from the first movie. And a few interesting bits and pieces. I think it is a stronger film than the one that came before. Not nearly as strong as The Mummy. But let's jump in to The Mummy's Tomb. That actually sounds like a very poor idea. I don't think I would want to do that. And of course, beware of spoilers, because we are going to be looking at this entire film. Okay, so we're talking about a Universal picture. Lon Chaney, and in case this does mean Lon Chaney Jr., in The Mummy's Tomb, 1942, with Dick Foran, John Hubbard, Elise Knox, George Zucco, Wallace Ford, Turhan Bey. Now, Dick Foran, George Zucco, and Wallace Ford are all reprising their roles from the previous film. John Hubbard is going to be playing Dick Foran's son. Well, he's playing Steve Banning's son, who was played by Dick Foran. Dr. John Banning. Elise Knox is playing Isabel Evans, the love interest for Dr. John Banning. And our new villain is going to be Turhan Bey playing Mehmet Bey. Not sure how you actually pronounce that properly, but we'll just call him, you know what? We'll probably just call him Turhan Bey. Screenplay by Griffin J. Henry, Zucker, original story Neil P. Varnick. And there we see the rest of the credits. Vera West doing the gowns. She did an incredible number of gowns for these films, for Universal horror type pictures. Kind of a sad ending to her own personal story. But she did quite a bit. It'd be kind of interesting. I've thought about this, of maybe trying to put something together, looking at the costuming she did, especially the gowns, for these various women who play the damsel in distress in these pictures. Directed by Harold Young. Now, Harold Young had directed the Scarlet Pimpernel in 1934. Also did a segment of The Three Caballeros for Disney in 1944. Does a pretty good job with this, but just like the previous one, it feels almost more like a murder mystery programmer than a horror movie at times. It seems to rely on the fact that Mummy equals horror to be a horror picture, and misses out on some opportunities to ramp up tension and the kind of stuff you would expect. So we begin with this article on Stephen Banning. Now, if you remember, in the last film, he was not an old man. Well, that's because this film is set 30 years later. And I will say, now, obviously with a horror movie, monster makeup, very important. They do an extremely good job in this of the old age makeup. They do not, in any way, shape, or form, overdo it. And the actors do a good job of playing themselves older and not, again, overdoing it, where they talk like this or something. They do a good job, I think, of portraying themselves 30 years older. And so the film opens in Dr. Steve Banning's house in New England. He's entertaining his son and his son's fiance, and another person there. I'm not sure who she is. It's not his sister. Maybe it's his sister, but I thought she came in at a different point. So this is Dr. John Banning, Steve Banning's son. This is his fiance, Isabel Evans. Now, Dr. John Banning is played by John Hubbard. Isabel is played by Elise Knox, who is the mother of Mark Harmon. If you've seen him in any of a number of TV shows, and I know he's been, NCIS for a long time. For me, I'll always remember him from Summer School, a great little flick that we try to watch every year during the summertime. She only worked in Hollywood for a little while. Her last film was in 1948 called Forgotten Women. And she played Anne Howe in a number of Joe Palooka films, but she didn't stay in the business really long. And that's probably for the best if you know anything about Hollywood. And I think that is his sister, Jane Banning, played by Mary Gordon. And so he's telling everybody the story of what happened 30 years ago in Egypt when they encountered the mummy. And he's very upfront about that. And so at this point, we're going to get to see some footage from the previous film or films. This one actually has clips in it from The Mummy's Hand, from Frankenstein, from Bride of Frankenstein, and Ghost of Frankenstein. So, Universal, these are B pictures. You got to save money. So there's various clips strewn throughout. Okay, no, there's a sister. That's his sister, Jane, the older woman. That's what I was thinking. Anyhow, we go from that happy domestic scene to, again, talking about what had happened, that fateful encounter with the mummy. Here, of course, we see High Priest Andoheb, played by George Zucco. This is as he was 30 years ago. We see him reviving the mummy, killing the other doctor. So we're going through, and then, of course, with the mummy is destroyed by the fire, and that was the end of that. And they do kind of mention that he, in fact, did marry Marta, played by Peggy Moran. And this is sort of an aged-up photo of her. Again, a pretty good job, actually. I give a lot of credit to the folks who did like set design, costume, makeup. They really did their jobs. And so here, she passed away apparently a few years ago. So now we're going to see Andoheb, who was apparently killed in the last film, but apparently he wasn't completely dead. And he has survived into old age. And he is now doing in this film what the previous high priest did for him in The Mummy's Hand. He is passing on that high priest role with the medal and etc. And so he's meeting in the tomb of Princess Ananka with Mehmet Bey, played by Turhan Bey. He does a reasonably good job in this as the villain. I liked him. I liked the performance. It wasn't none of this stuff is, Academy Award level, but he did a good job with it. And we do see Kharis, and what he's being told is, all right, you're taking over the family business here. Those people violated the tomb of Ananka. They must die, and their families must die. And so you're going to travel to New England with Kharis and enact our revenge. And he shows him the Tana leaf thing, 3 at the full moon to keep him supple and undead, and 9 to make him walk and talk and kill. And he passes on the medallion and gives him the high sign and sends him on his way. And he gives the oath, I'm going to kill everybody and be a good little high priest, yada, yada, yada. And at that, Lisbeth Andoheb passes away. Or maybe he just fell asleep. When you're older, it's hard to tell. So we next see Mehmet in the hold of a ship going across. He's apparently bringing over this sarcophagus for a museum or something of that nature. That's at least what he's telling this guy. He needs to be alone with it. He needs to check it, etc. So he gets the guy out of there, opens it up. This is the first time we're really... No, I guess we did see it in the last, but... So we're seeing Lon Chaney Jr. as the mummy. Now, this was the first film that Chaney did after renewing his contract with Universal, which seems odd to me. It's the Chaney name, because you don't get to do a whole lot of acting as the mummy, frankly. You have no lines. Your face is covered in the makeup, so you can't put a whole lot of emotion into that. Seems an odd thing to use Lon Chaney for. You'd think that you could get away with using, somebody else, but Lon Chaney Jr., and he is going to be in the sequel to this. So they ultimately arrive at the Mapleton cemetery, Mapleton being where the Bannings live. And Turhan Bey has taken the role of the groundskeeper. He's going to be in charge of the cemetery. And so he talks with the earlier, groundskeeper and this and that. You see the full moon, so he knows he has some work he needs to do. So he gets in there and he, locks everything up, makes sure nobody's around, and then starts the tan of tea and gives him the drops to raise Kharis to the point where he is mobile, ambulatory, as they would call it. And he sends him out on his first kill. And so off he goes. And this is I thought this was interesting. And maybe it's a little bit filler, and maybe not. And if you play Dungeons and Dragons or something, and you're a DM looking for inspiration, as he's going to the Banning residence, he's going to pass like this couple necking in a car, and his shadow is going to fall over them. And when it does, it scares people. They're not seeing the mummy. She, for example, is, sleeping in her bedroom, and the shadow passes across and it wakes her up, just the shadow. So it gives this sort of aura of fear to the mummy. And of course, she wakes up her husband. There's something going on. He gets on and calls the sheriff, and the sheriff is like, "You didn't see anything. What are you calling me for?" He's kind of angry about it. And you have, a guy tending to some horses, and they start going nuts around the mummy. So this little happy group is sort of winding up the night, having talked about this and that and the other, as Kharis arrives. Now, here's another thing that I think is an improvement over the mummy's hand. You remember the mummy's hand, you don't really see the mummy until like 40 minutes, 35 minutes into the movie. And it's only about an hour and 10 minutes. This one's about the same length. Here we get the mummy much, much earlier. So you get a lot more mummy in this film. Very smart. The way to go. Dogs are going nuts. And they hear the dogs barking. Well, they figure it's nothing to worry about. We do get some nice scenes of the mummy making his way to the house and kind of stumbling around. Mummy's a little heavy. I just kind of noticed that. I don't know. Maybe there's some bloating. So Banning is, preparing for bed, preparing to retire. And he finally catches sight of Kharis, something he hasn't seen for 30 years. Thought he would never see again. Kharis comes in through the open French doors. People in the old days always had the windows and doors wide open. And so, he's backing away, and we get this shot of him with the hand out, coming towards him, and strangles him. That's the end of Steve Banning. Wow. So the mummy really has taken revenge. It's a short role for Dick Foran. I think he did a really good job in it, so applause for Dick Foran. Good job. They hear the commotion. Isabel and Jane hear the commotion. And so they go running upstairs to find out what happened. John, I think, had gone outside to see what the dogs were barking about. He rushes in too, finds his father dead. And so we go back to the cemetery where Mehmet is waiting and basically tucking Kharis in for the night. The first revenge has been taken. But remember, it's not just Steve that's going to be dealt with. It's also Babe Jensen, and it's also Steve's family. So these guys are quite evil. And you notice, I should have mentioned this, when Andaheb was giving him his instructions, he also prayed that the gods protected him from temptation. Because you remember, that's what got Andaheb, his temptation for Marta. That was his undoing. So he's praying, you're not going to be tempted like I was tempted. Again, it's one of those issues, I guess, when you're, talking about, priesthoods. I guess maybe they're celibate or something. And so women are a big temptation for them. No temptations yet. So now we're getting some what's forensics on the crime scene. And the doctor tells them that it's this mummy dust. There's mold, etc. So these folks come in. This is the couple that was necking in the car. Behind them are the couple who had the farm. And they're telling the sheriff about their experiences with the shadow, waking up with this fear and all that stuff. So they're trying to hammer in, that there's something supernatural happening. So back home, John is going through papers of his father's, and Jane is there. I think they established that his father had already been buried at this point. And Isabel arrives, so they're going to go out and, take a drive and all that kind of good stuff. And they go out for this picnic. And this is when Mehmet sees Isabel for the first time. Remember that whole thing about temptation? Well, he's tempted. He likes what he sees. Prays for strength to resist. So at this point, they get this telegram from Babe Jensen. He's heard about what's happened, and he's heading to Mapleton from New York. The wolves are howling. You recall in the last movie, the wolves howling was a portent that the mummy was alive, was moving, and he has been raised again to do more killing, and off he goes. You'd think they could get a little closer to town, a little more convenient, because the guy's dragging a leg. I mean, it's a little tough. So now we see John Banning driving Babe Jensen. So again, Wallace Ford with the old age makeup. Babe, kind of the hero of the first movie, takes out Andaheb. At least we think he finishes him off. He doesn't, apparently. Manages to shoot the Tana leaves away from Kharis so he can't become like super mummy. The negative to the character was they had him doing a lot of comedy that didn't really hit. So the Babe character could be a little bit annoying in the first film. Not annoying at all in here. And again, Wallace Ford also does a really good job of playing an old guy and not overdoing it in any way. So he's kind of heard the details of what's going on, and he knows exactly what it is. He's positive it's Kharis. John's not quite ready to believe it. Again, now we see the shadow of the mummy moving over, and this time, this guy kind of gets in the way. He happens to have a shotgun, I believe, takes a shot at the mummy, does no good. He's left dead. Now Jane comes out to see what's going on, and the mummy slides up behind her, and that is the end of Jane Banning. So the mummy, 2 kills already in this film. Well, 3, I guess, actually, with that other guy, but 2 acts of revenge taken, and off he goes back home to Mehmet. Oh, now, I guess I got that wrong, because that guy, I guess, wasn't killed. But he's like totally in shock. Can't say anything, can't speak. So he can't really tell them what he's seen. So even though a couple different people have said it's the mummy, it's Kharis, a lot of folks still aren't quite on with that. So mysterious killer strikes again. One thing I noted is they referred to the murderer, whoever it might be, as a fiend killer, which I think would have been the terminology back then for what we would now call a psychopath or a serial killer, somebody who kills for fun, for the kicks. Just thought that was interesting. I'm like, I don't know if I've ever heard that term used before. Well, I've seen this movie, so I guess I have heard it used before, but didn't register with my little brain. So the news is out. Mysterious killer strikes again. Witchcraft revived in New England. Second fiend murder, there we go, at Mapleton, Massachusetts. Jim, helper at the Banning home, only witness to the last Mapleton murder, is now in a hospital completely paralyzed and suffering from severe mental shock, and will probably die without divulging the reason for his condition. So the news has gotten out, and the ace newsmen of the country here to cover mystery. Oh, goody, because we all know nobody's more trustworthy than journalists. So they're in this bar in Mapleton. Obviously, they're reporters. In old movies, reporters and band members are always in bars. They're always drunk. Probably kind of true, too, at the time. So they're talking this stuff over. And one of them mentions the Russian front. Okay, well, interesting for two reasons. Most of these movies, even though they're set in the 1940s, never mention World War II. The war is never mentioned at all. Whatever you do, don't mention the war. Well, they've just talked about the Russian front, so they've mentioned the war. But is it like 1970? Is World War III going on? Were they under the impression World War II would still be going on 30 years later? Okay, look. This is 30 years later, and yet it's not 30 years later. It just is what it is. We're not going to worry about it. So Babe and John are talking, and Babe's trying to convince him, what's going on. And no, what we saw was true. We really did encounter a mummy. It all really happened, John. It's not just some story your dad made up. And he goes to the police and says, look, it is a mummy. There is a mummy. It's killing people. And it's going to be very, very difficult to stop. They're still not 100% on board. He's kind of disgusted with them, but I'm just an old guy. Why listen to me? And again, so they're kind of like, well, even if it is a mummy, what are we going to do about it? He ends up in the bar talking to the reporter. Now, the reporter wants to hear about the mummy because that's a good story. And so Mehmet is also in the bar listening in. And he becomes aware of who Babe Jensen is and that he is in town. So the reporters are getting excited about this. Sheriff's having a heck of a time. People want this solved. He's hearing all this mummy stuff that he doesn't know how to deal with. This guy's coming to, I think he was reporting something similar, that he had seen the mummy. Here we have the mummy walking past, some shops like on Main Street. And this guy's saying, the mummy's walking. It's out there. Reporters all run out to see this thing. Babe Jensen does as well. Unfortunately for him, the mummy finds him. And he takes care of Babe. All right. The third one down. And obviously, Marta they're not going to be able to deal with because she had already passed away. So who's left at this point? Well, John is left. John is the last person in that line. If he marries Isabel, she would be probably at risk as well. Good makeup on the mummy. Nice job with it. Still has the slicked back hair, but just seems like they could have used like sort of a cap to make it look more like bandages or something. I don't know. Not that big of a deal. So he's examined. They find the same evidence that they found on Steve, undoubtedly that they found on his sister as well. And so he's saying, hey, you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're dealing with the undead. Killer fiend loose again. The news is running wild. Babe Hansen murdered. Oh, I guess that would because there was the other quotation mark on the other side of the name. So John and Isabel go out for a walk, trying to obviously deal with the tension of going through what they're going through. And he happens to notice a bandage on a bush outside the house. Maybe there's something to all this mummy talk after all. Geez, kid, you think your dad was lying to you? So he takes it in and they examine it and they find, yes, oh yes, indeed, this is definitely from that mummy. And I think this is actually when he finally does deliver that line. Whether you're ready to accept it or not, we are dealing with the presence of the living dead. Well, the sheriff and his deputy are not thrilled with this, but they're starting to realize that they have no choice but to deal with exactly that. So John decides, me and Isabel, we're getting out of here. We're going to get married elsewhere. Too much ugly stuff going on. Because he's gotten this telegram that he's appointed as a captain in the medical corps, etc. You're going to have to be called up. And so he says, no, I'm not leaving without you. We're getting married first and you're going to come with me. And now Mehmet, spying on them again, is thinking, oh no, you're not going to marry her. She's dreamy. She's mine. So he is succumbing to the same temptation that Andaheb did. And he's going to send Kharis out to deal with John and to bring her back to him. Meanwhile, she is being feted for her wedding dress. All excitement about that kind of stuff. Kharis, get out there, get her done. And at that, Kharis is a little disturbed. What do you mean? Bring back the girl. That's not the plan. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. Would we call Kharis sympathetic here? Well, not really. He's down with the evil. But he definitely is sort of like, hey, that isn't right. But he is under Mehmet's control. And so off he goes to do what he has to do. Again, we get the shadow falling on people and waking them up. She's thinking about her boyfriend and, falls asleep. And in comes Kharis to retrieve the woman. Great shot. The hand coming down. We see the shadow getting closer to her face. And she awakens and sees him getting closer and screams. And he grabs her and heads on out. Now, I will say, Kharis is sort of slow moving, but by God, he can get moving when he needs to. And the lady she's staying with, oh my God, screams as well, seeing her dragged out of there. The word passes around. It's angry mob time. And so as he's carrying her back, they're letting him know, we got this mummy on the loose. You're going to have to go out and find it. They actually hadn't heard yet about the woman being kidnapped. They were just going to go out and search and try to find this thing. I think, getting instructions, don't actually try to confront it yourself. And at that point, lady shows up. John, they've got Isabel. And he's like, shit. So we see now Mehmet welcoming Kharis back and welcoming Isabel. He puts her on the coffin. Angry mob, you got to have your torches. And he's not on board with what he's trying to do. He's going to, do the whole, I'll give you this stuff and me, and we'll live forever, and you'll be mine forever. Very much like Andaheb was doing in the mummy's hand. Obviously, Isabel's not really down with this. She'd rather stick with the doctor. So we get, a couple nice scenes of this, and it may be a little bit of padding, but not too bad. This movie's relatively tight in terms of direction, in terms of story. We are going to get some shots of the angry crowd heading that way. So he's preparing the solution. You see Kharis in the background. He's going to try to make her drink. I believe she had passed out by this time. Kharis looking on like, this is wrong. You're going to get us in trouble, man. Here they come to the cemetery. And he says, Kharis, take her, get out of here. But don't let him, don't let him have her. And they come to the front door. He's sneaking out the back. Kharis is sneaking out of the back with the lady. John sees Mehmet, who came out, and, they're having a tense little moment, and Mehmet's trying to act very secure, pulls a gun on him, and gets shot himself by the sheriff. Not messing around anymore. So Kharis now has Isabel. And where is Kharis going to take Isabel? Well, as it turns out, and I believe this is one of the images from one of the Frankenstein movies, because it clearly was not filmed for this. It turns out he's going to take her to the Banning house because they only have a couple different sets to work with. And he's a stranger in town. He really doesn't know where else to go. So again, a little bit of filler here as they're chasing him across the countryside. Notice the gown by Vera West. Very nice. Looks good. Perfect for a damsel in distress. You're going to see that in the next one as well. So he arrives at the house and carries her in as they arrive and see him going to the house. He might have been up on the patio at that point. Don't remember now. But you get the idea. They've surrounded the house. They have torches. Something's not going to go well. So John and this guy run into the house with their torches, which seemed to me like, if this was my house, that would not be the first move I made. Although I guess where you go, okay, but what am I going to do with the mummy? Yeah, but I don't want to burn my house down accidentally. And at this point, Kharis is starting to head back down the stairs. They encounter one another, and he knocks him down, and the dude actually falls on the torch, the stunt guy. So God bless the stunt guy. You almost feel like he had to have been burned a little bit there. So he falls, he's knocked out, and of course, a fire has started. Kharis heads back upstairs. And now what we're going to get is a lot of back and forth. The fire's starting to spread. John is going to eventually wake up, head back up to try to stop Kharis. Again, he's going to not do very well because the mummy outclasses him, but he does have a torch, finds another torch, and or maybe it was the same one that was just on the floor. Uses it, so he finds, I can hold him off a little bit, at least with fire. And so finally he has a weapon he can use. And he manages to get a hold of Isabel. They're walking across this burning balcony with Kharis in pursuit. And he gets a hold of him. And then the sheriff and them show up and they start shooting at him. Now this causes Kharis to turn around, but we know bullets don't affect him. So I don't know if it was just annoyance, but it gives John time to lower Isabel to the ground where everybody's standing. And Kharis is now trapped by the flames. And John at this point and the others start setting the house on fire. They're going to deal with Kharis one way or another. A terrible ending for the mummy, whose reign of terror ends in flames. John Banning weds Isabel Evans, culminating long courtship. My reading skills are really on par today. Romance scores triumph over terror reign. So basically, America 2, Mummies 0. And the last bit is at the train station. Those two getting out, folks are throwing like confetti and etc. at them. And it's a happy ending in the Mummy's tomb. But not for Mehmet and not for Kharis. But they're the bad guys, so that's okay. The end, a universal picture. So, well, let's see. We could probably take the spoilers down at this point. So what do we think of this film? Like I said, we get more of the mummy. He gets to do some cool stuff, going after everybody. The The acting's fairly decent in this one. You know, obviously no Academy Award winners, but not bad. And Zucco, Ferran, and Wallace Ford really do a good job playing their older selves. They did an excellent job, and the makeup was good. Makeup was great on the Mummy. It's a pretty tight story. It keeps things moving. It doesn't really bog down. There's maybe a little bit of filler here and there. All the Mummy movies are relatively short, and most of them have some filler. It's hard to work with the Mummy. He can't talk. He can in the first one. You get a lot more interesting dialogue, a more interesting storyline. He can't talk in the other ones. He's kind of a force of nature. And I think that's part of their problem, because if they were handling him more the way you get Jason, Michael Myers in Halloween, I think you could do more with it, right? This inevitable thing, stalking you, running you down. It won't, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Every time you think you killed it, it keeps coming back. But they weren't doing that kind of stuff back then. That would have been a great way to handle a Mummy movie. As it is, you don't quite get the tension. So it's a little bit of a horror movie. It's a little bit of a murder mystery. Again, there are people right off the bat telling them there's something crazy going on here, like with a mummy, but people can't believe it. But they gradually come to. So that's kind of where the murder mystery comes in, as the clues finally pile up and they have to deal with the situation. But overall, a definite improvement over the Mummy's Hand. Not as good as the original Mummy, but an improvement. And so overall, I would probably give this one, a B minus, C plus, B minus, somewhere in there. So far as the Mummy series, Hand, Tomb, Ghost, Curse, I think the Mummy's Tomb is leading the pack. What say you in the audience? What do you think about the Mummy's Tomb? Do you like it better than the first one? Do you not like it as well as the first one? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this film. Overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm overall enjoying the Mummy movies. I've had my complaints, but I haven't been at the point where I'm like, oh, just turn this thing off. They're pretty fun. And I think, if you're trying to introduce your kids to horror movies, attention span can be a little bit tough, but some of these kind of B movies are not a bad way to go. They're not super scary. They're not gory, but they might be a little bit slow. I mean, if you've raised your kids to have an attention span, you probably don't have trouble. If you haven't, you probably do. But anyways, but overall, not too bad. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Maybe think of subscribing to the channel. Maybe think sharing with a friend if you think there's somebody else out there who might appreciate these little reviews that I do. We're going to be doing The Mummy all month here. We got a couple more movies to go. So make sure you tune back in if you're enjoying the series on The Mummy movies from Universal. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there, and I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.